Good morning from 89.7 NPR News. It's 64 degrees outside, mostly cloudy today with a high near 68. More clouds with a low of 46 for tonight.
Sometimes our friends get a little stuck, obsessing over a topic or a story, a vague text. Because you're a good friend, you listen. But when the news gets fixated, maybe you're less patient. On Morning Edition, we cover what's happening in the world, in art, science, and education. You get the news you need, then we move on. Don't get stuck. Listen to Morning Edition every weekday from NPR News.
Wake up with Morning Edition starting at 5 on 89.7 NPR News.
Alabama Governor Kay Ivey has signed into law what is considered the nation's toughest anti-abortion law, banning the procedure except in the case of serious health risk to the mother. Ohio isn't far behind with its so-called heartbeat bill, which is now a law and under challenge by ACLU of Ohio. We talk about the latest spate in the movement to ban abortions in the U.S. That's Tuesday on All Sides with Ann Fisher from 10 to noon on 89.7 NPR News.
Support comes from Watershed Distillery, maker of a family of Ohio gins, and Watershed Kitchen and Bar, serving honest Midwest food and drinks in Grandview. Cocktail recipes, tours, reservations, and more at watersheddistillery.com.
Welcome back to All Sides. I'm your host, Ann Fisher. An independent investigation of former Ohio State physician Richard Strauss has found that Strauss abused at least 177 male students and that university officials never took action on a raft of complaints leveled over the many years he was there. Jim Hopper is an independent consultant and teaching associate in psychology at Harvard Medical School. He has studied the psychological and biological effects of sexual abuse on adult males. He joins us by phone. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Steve Snyder-Hill was a student at OSU in the mid-1990s when he was sexually assaulted by Strauss. We welcome you as well. Thanks for joining us.
I appreciate it.
Steve, tell us, was your experience with Dr. Strauss in the examination room like we read so much about in the report?
Yeah, the difference with mine, I think, is that I was not a wrestler at the time. So when the initial reports of Strauss came out, I did not make the connection that it was him at all until I saw his face. That's when I knew for sure. And
you used the word when we were talking beforehand that it triggered for you.
Oh, absolutely.
You felt it was a trigger.
I could smell his breath after I saw his face. It took me right back 24 years ago.
What happened?
So I went into student health for a lump on my chest. I'm student B in the report, actually. Okay. But went in and they gave me Strauss, and it's basically, I'll spare your listeners the graphic detail, but he basically did all the same things as well as got aroused and pushed himself up against me, performed all the same unnecessary things that he did on everybody else. I think the more interesting part of my story starts afterwards when I made all the complaints.
Okay.
So basically I called in and told them what happened, went to the administrator of the time, and his Ted Grace, and basically explained to him what happened to me, and got pulled into a meeting with Strauss, another psychiatrist or psychologist maybe, head of the student counseling services, and Grace and Strauss themselves, and we were all in there, and basically I confronted him, and the meeting did not go well. It was a 2-hour meeting. Strauss yelled at me at the end of it. And we never got resolution. And at the end of the day, I was talking to Grace on the phone, and I said, look, obviously nobody's listening to me, so I have 3 things that I want you to promise me. And I said, number 1, I want you to promise me that it's never happened before to anybody else. Number 2, I want you to promise me that if it ever happens again, that you contact me, because if you do, I will make sure that we do something about it. And number 3, I want you to promise me that this is documented in this file. Now, 24 years later, I can't tell you how traumatic it is to know that all 3 of those things ended up being lies. They were actually, I found out in the Perkins report now, that they were dealing with a person that came in 2 days prior to me with the same complaint, even though he told me that. And so as a kid, I'd just gotten out of the Army. So as a kid, I made those demands, and he said, I'm sure we can do all that. And I said, great, then put it in a letter to me. And there was silence on the end of the phone. And he gave me a letter, and that's my documentation that I have today. There's also one thing that the Perkins report actually got wrong, is that it said that student A was the one that worked with him to come up with new forms, and that was me. We talked about it. He had asked me the question, why didn't you do something, in the exam room? And I said, you can't put yourself in my place. You can't understand what that's like. And so I said, had you, on the forms that you gave me, if it would have said, I'm not comfortable with this being checked, then I could have done that, and then there would have been no question. And so he said, we can, we'll do that. And then he sent me these new forms they were going to use.
Jim Hopper, a lot of times people say that, well, why didn't they just stop it? Why did they let it go on? What do we know about what anyone's going through? A lot of people have predisposed ideas about what a male adult, technically a male adult, is going to do under such circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, what anyone would do, but especially it gets put on males and male adults, this idea that, if someone tried to do that to you, you would fight them off, or you would just get out of there. You wouldn't let someone do that to you. And it's really based on a misconception about how our brains actually work. So yes, sometimes people do push people off or fight them off in certain ways, but most of these things happen in the context of being in a trusting situation, someone who you think is someone you can trust, who's not going to hurt you. In a doctor's situation, they're there to actually take care of your well-being. And when suddenly they are doing things, where they're using you in this way, where they're hurting you in this way, it really sends a jolt to the brain. And very quickly, people can feel confused, dumbfounded, and kind of shock. They can freeze up. And they don't have a repertoire of things to do because they've never been in this situation before. And so people can just be in shock for a while. They can have really extreme options pop up in their head, like punch the guy in the face or just wait for it to end. And neither of those seem like a good choice, so people can be frozen in that way for a while. There's a whole variety of things that can get in the way of people doing anything physical. That are automatic and reflexive, that are based on habits of dealing with aggressive and dominant people or submitting to authority. I mean, there's a whole variety of things that can pop up in those situations that give these perpetrators just free rein.
The idea that people feel like, well, why can't you just get over it? And the people who question how Steve Snyder-Hill, my other guest on the show, could be re-traumatized by the news of this coming out, and finding then, again, in reading the report, that none of the things that he asked the administrator to do were ever honored.
Right. Well, so you brought up a couple of things there. One is this issue of why can't people just get over it? That's what a lot of people do try to do. Right afterwards, they try to just block it out and not think about it. That's what they try to do. That may work a little bit. It may not work so well. A lot of times people just try to push it out of their mind. We saw in the report that several people ended up quitting the team to try and get away from this guy. Their continued play on the team was contingent upon them submitting to these kinds of things. So they were in a terrible position. But yeah, people try to get over it and they try to block it out, and they may not think or talk about it for 20 years. But like Steve said, when you see that face or you hear that reminder on the news, then all these sensations and those kind of really intense memories that you've blocked out for 20 years, those can come flooding back. And, trying to just get over it and push it aside, that doesn't necessarily work to deal with those really awful sensory memories that can really torment people, even decades later, and be very vivid.
Steve Snyder-Hill, how did the experience and the abuse affect you going forward with school and stuff? We talked about how a lot of times students just dropped out of teams. It was unclear always exactly why they did it. But what about you?
Oh, and I have a really interesting story. So I'm gay. So I basically, at the time, I think that really affected me negatively because my parents to this day asked me why I didn't tell them about Strauss. And I said my initial gut reaction was that I didn't want them to think that all gay people were like him. And that affected me probably differently.
And you were out by then, you knew?
Yeah, I was out. And it just affected me really strongly because I felt like that I didn't want, I think that Strauss had several things going on, probably mental health issues as well. But there was a lot of anger there. And I can tell you that my anger continues into 2019. And I'm at a loss because Strauss is dead. I have nobody to focus that anger on right now. And so the anger gets turned back on OSU and Ted Grace and everything else. And I'm trying to find a healthy way to live. Nobody can understand what it's like to put something away 24 years ago and just feel like nobody listened to me. And then all of a sudden, last July, I found out not only was everything that I thought true, but it was worse than I thought. A kid was right before me, and then they gave him a excellent on his performance appraisal right after me, and he was allowed to retire with emeritus status. And this has all come, it's just crashing down all these realities that you've kind of repressed for 24 years. And you can't understand what that makes you feel like. Plus the experience of what I'm going through now with OSU is just really, really rough.
OSU has promised counseling for anybody who wants it. They'll pay for it. That's independent counseling. It's not associated with the university. However anybody wants to do it, I think, is pretty much what President Drake has told me about. How does that, what's your feeling so far about the response that the university's taken in the past year?
So my feeling is that I think that if I frame it with how hard it is to find out what happened 24 years ago and how much anger there is, that helps frame the situation. So in my perspective, my reality came crashing down in July of last year, and immediately I didn't want to attach my name to it because I wanted to know for sure if that was his name. I couldn't remember his name, so I immediately had asked Perkins Coie I said, I think that I was
investigating.
Yeah, I said, I think that I was one of the people, but I just need to be sure. And she said, Steve, I'm so glad you came forward. We were hoping you would. We have some of your paperwork. And immediately I was infuriated because I thought, why didn't you contact me? And I get it. I get that they said that the trauma-informed approach, but I can speak from my experience that it was pretty traumatic thinking, nobody called me, nobody told me, because even 24 years ago, nobody told me.
Yeah, that trauma-informed approach is sort of a double-edged sword, Jim Hopper. What about that?
Well, it's really a dilemma because there are some people who they also had information about who would have been enraged if they did contact them. Mm-hmm. And sometimes people have blocked these memories out and they don't want to think about it, or they haven't for a long time, and then it can be very disruptive to their life. But I totally hear where Steve's coming from, that to know that they knew about him and didn't approach him is also really hard. But the fundamental principle behind that is that to be abused in this way is to be treated by someone as an object, but to have someone wielding power over you and harming you in that way. And so in terms of coping and healing and even seeking justice, giving power to the survivor is one of the key principles of that. And one way that can manifest is to not push them to talk about it if they don't want to. Mm-hmm. But again, for Steve, this felt disempowering until he when he heard that they hadn't gotten in touch with him. So yeah, it can be difficult, but we've learned from decades of experience that trying to do things to or for survivors that they are not choosing often is very re-traumatizing for them and makes things worse.
A lot of people never say anything, never do anything about it. And one of the victims, I think, said, and this was a member of one of the sports teams, I don't know which, because they didn't want to identify in the report, or they did as little as possible, said that they kind of, it was a joke. It was a rumored joke around on the team and that kind of a thing, that people just sort of joked about it, and they didn't feel like comfortable telling anybody because they thought they would be mocked for kind of like, come on, be a man, get over it.
Yeah, I mean, people will tell themselves all kinds of things about really uncomfortable experiences to try and put a spin on them that fits with their image of who they are or how they want to be perceived by others. And this happens at all levels. It happens with the victims. It happens with other people who have inklings that this is going on. It happens with administrators. I mean, people tell themselves all kinds of stories. But for those who have had the experience, underneath that story is some really disturbing emotions, like Steve has talked about, and also some really disturbing, visual images, sensations of being touched. I mean, all kinds of stuff below those, stories that people tell themselves to try to feel comfortable.
Do you think we do enough even still to educate boys about sexual abuse to the same extent that we do girls?
No, definitely not. It's still hugely neglected in our culture and cultures around the world. And it's not just about educating kids. I mean, really, adults need to take responsibility for understanding this stuff and for supporting kids. And there's a lot of programs, just tell someone, do this or that. If someone touches you, it's your body. That's great, but really adults need to be the ones who are educated. And so for like an organization called Stop It Now, it takes a public health approach to educating adults so that they can feel comfortable dealing with the realities of this. They can feel comfortable talking to each other, seeking out authorities if they need to. So really adults need to take responsibility for the prevention and stopping childhood sexual abuse.
Steve Snyder-Hill, how old were you when the abuse occurred?
It was in 1995, so I was born in 70, so 25.
Okay, so that's right. You served in the Army beforehand, so you were a little bit older. And I'm wondering what you think about your experience informed you to the extent that you did what you did, which was pretty thorough. I mean, you got it in writing. You asked for those 3 promises. A lot of younger people don't have the presence of mind to do that.
Right. I think that my military experience probably did kind of dictate a little bit of my maturity at the time. In the Perkins report, it actually described me as a very mature, believable person. So I definitely think that helped. I think that it was different, and that's kind of sad for kids now that might not have that maturity or might not think to protect themselves like that. Right,
because Jim Hopper, a guy even, I guess this was my Psychology 100 class, says you're not technically an emotional adult until you're in your mid-20s.
Yeah, I mean, it's, 18-year-olds are still young in some ways, and 18 to 22-year-olds. One thing I'd like to say about the military, though, is we also know there's a lot of sexual assault of 18 to 22-year-old males going on in the United States military. And in raw numbers, as many men are being sexually assaulted in the United States military as women, because men outnumber women about 6 to 1. Right. So there's lots of men being abused in the military, and a lot of those men are not telling anyone, and a lot of those men are getting the message from above that it's not safe or they're going to be retaliated against. So while there's a lot of great values and things that can be internalized in the military, and certainly Steve is an example of that, there's also a culture in the military of denial and even retaliation against people who report these things.
It's an institutional culture. That's one thing that a big university like Ohio State and the military have in common, is it's about protecting the institution and making things look good on the surface. At least that's the way people feel.
Yeah, I mean, we see that over and over again. We saw it with Penn State. We see it with the Catholic Church. We see it with Michigan. We see it with the Olympic Committee.
State,
over and over again. Michigan State, sorry.
Yeah, I actually, it's my alma mater, so it's a pleasure in clarifying that. But so there's an institutional thing, and it sounds like Steve Snyder-Hill did everything right. But, what do you, Jim Hopper, recommend going forward to prepare people for this? Because a lot of people think this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, unfortunately, it is the tip of the iceberg. I mean, there's a lot of this going on in a lot of institutions, places where people are in positions of power and control and can get children alone, can get young adults alone to do these sorts of things. And then the institution, is trying to cover its butt and not have bad PR, not have lawsuits. And, of course, eventually it may blow up, as we're seeing here. And, there's people who are working on how institutions can take responsibility for this and create a culture of institutional courage to stand up for what's right, courage to protect children and young adults, and not to just cover your own institutional interests. And, there's a woman named Jennifer Fried, who's F-R-E-Y-D, who's written a lot about that, institutional courage, in contrast to institutional betrayal, because that's what Steve is really talking about here, massive betrayal at the time and for years afterwards. And that's what we need to do. We need to look very clearly at these cultures of betrayal that protect people and don't protect those who are vulnerable. And how do we help support those institutions to have the courage to create a new culture of really addressing this and being honest about it and protecting people and taking responsibility.
Don in Florida, you're on the air. Hi, Don.
Hi. I'm an Ohio resident. I just happened to be down here today.
Oh, okay.
I'm a former member of the WOSU wrestling program from 80 through 85, captained the program in 85. And knew Richard Strauss very well, was never a victim of what he did, but was not surprised. I emailed you this morning on this, and was not surprised when it happened. But there was a lot of other stuff going on that I don't want to have lost in this process.
Okay.
In the fact, and again, some of this may get graphic, and I apologize for that, but it's just real, that as athletes, we would finish up practice, and we had to walk into a locker room and into a shower where we had to, where on repeated occasions we witnessed men masturbating. And you'd run them out, or there'd be someone in the stalls, or there'd be someone in the sauna, and this all got reported upstream. You know, my old wrestling coach has passed away now, so he can't testify to this, but this is on the record. And the point that I want to make is that there was an environment. This isn't about Strauss, and I don't want it to get lost there. The fact that with Nassar and Michigan State, they focus around Nassar, and with Sandusky at Penn State, they focus around Sandusky, and they don't pay attention to the environment. But there was this really nasty environment that was there that I don't know if administrators froze when they heard about it and they had a sympathetic, fight or flight reaction, but they didn't do anything. So they either froze or they didn't care. And the point is that this has got to be a learning. We have to learn from this to not look at a person. Strauss is gone now, and we need to work with everybody he abused, but we also need to look institutionally at a situation that this can still happen today. There's a lot of sexual abuse taking place. There's a lot going on. And if we don't learn from this institutionally, then it's even worse.
Don, thank you so much for that call. Steve Snyder-Hill, I want to give you the last word in responding to what Don had to say.
So I not only agree with that, but I think that Ohio State going forward needs to take all those words into stride and to think about the trauma that's still being inflicted on people today as the investigation wraps up and they move forward. One of the things that probably has been the most gut-wrenching thing for me in this entire process is that a year ago, my reality came shocking down. I looked at Strauss's face and saw that. So I immediately reached out to OSU and said, I want to know any of the paperwork that I submitted back then, and kind of had to fight them a little bit to get it. Once I got it, they gave me 5 pages of my stuff that really was, it corroborated my story. Mm-hmm. Perkins dropped on Friday, and I learned that there were 22 pages that had my information in it. So the question that I posed back to Dr. Drake and the board was that when I asked for my stuff last year and you didn't give me the 16 pages that were really, really damaging to the university, and it's a public information request, I want them to answer to that. I want to know why, because like I said, I have a lot of anger right now, and I'm trying not to just be angry for no reason. I'm trying to be productive about this. But to me, that's not following the law, that they conveniently picked what they wanted to release to me and held the rest until Perkins came out. And when we talk about re-traumatizing, Strauss was traumatizing. This, finding out that there were 16 more pages that were really awful, and finding out that they did a performance appraisal after me and that guy before him, that was terrible. And finding out that they didn't give me that information, and then for the last 5 months, I've been badgering them daily for that. And so that's stuff they need to understand when you talk about an institution. That's very traumatizing to people that are survivors.
Well, Steve Snyder-Hill, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate your time and appreciate your willingness to open up about this. That's Steve Snyder-Hill. He's a former Ohio State student and a victim of Richard Strauss. Also, Jim Hopper, thanks to you as well. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Jim Hopper is a psychologist, an independent consultant, and teaching associate in psychology at our Harvard Medical School. Coming up, we're going to hear from the executive vice president and provost at Ohio State. So stay with us. This is All Sides with Ann Fisher on 89.7 NPR News.
You're listening to 89.7 NPR News. I'm Kyle McKinnon. It's mostly cloudy today with a high near 68 degrees. More clouds with a low of 46 for tonight.
I'm Meghna Chakrabarty. Coming up on the next On Point, a Harvard law professor was part of Harvey Weinstein's defense team. Students objected. Now that professor